Good morning, all of you. This is Ripu Damantin, and in this video, I am going to explain you how to find the complexity of any code line by line. So the complexity we need to find, that means how many times that particular line has run and how much time it will take for a particular algo to work. That means how much time it will take to run and execute that particular action. That means we need to calculate the complexity of particular line and add up those lines to find the particular complexity of the whole algo that we need to find out in this particular video. That means if we have a set of code in which first line is int a is equal to 0, that means the compiler is going to run this particular line one times only. That means the complexity of this line is 1. That means it will only run one times in one run if the code is run one times. That means if a loop, that means iterativeness occurs. That means it will iterates a number of times according to the scenarios given in this particular factors. Now I'm going to take an example for you guys so that we can get that how we are going to do that. Let's just say we have a set of code in which int c is equal to 0, then for loop, then we have int I is equal to 0 and I less than, let's just say n, and let's just take 10 here, 10 and I plus plus. That means it is going to iterate this particular set of block. That means console, sorry, that means this particular set of code is going to run how many times from 0 to 9. That means n times. That is the n provided here. That means this particular line will run 1 times and this set of code will run 10 times and this will run how many times? This particular block, that means int I is equal to 0 is going to initiate this particular variable in this scope, and which is I is equal to 0, which will only occur 1 times, and this is going to check the value of each and every after each and every iteration. That means it is going to check the value actually from 0 to 9, that means 10, and for the 10 also that is going to iterate. That means 10 plus 1 plus this is going to increase the value 10 times from 0 to 9 and then 10. That means it is going to iterate 0 to 1, that is 1, 0 to 2, that means 9, and 9 to 10, that is 10. So it's going to iterate this much, and for this particular line the complexity or the time complexity is 1 plus 10 plus 1 plus 10, and this is going to iterate this particular loop 10 times. Let's just now take an example for while loop. That means let's just say we have while loop, and in this I is less than 20 and initiating the I here, that is equal to 0 for now, but in this we are incrementing the I by 1. So we need to calculate how do we find the complexity of this particular set of code. That means 1 for this one, because it is only going to initiate 1 times and declaring and assigning the variable here. Then while loop will occur this much time, which will be calculated from the I. That means it starts from 0, then it will go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 till 19. That means less than 20, that is 19. That means from 0 to 19, 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 until 19. That means it is going to iterate 20 plus 1, that means 20 for the 0 to 19, and 1 for checking for the value when it is 20. That means 0 to 20, that is 21. That means 20 plus 1, the time complexity of this particular line, and this is going to iterate how many times? 20 times, because the value starts from 0 and goes to 19. That means this is going to iterate it 20 times. After when the value of I reaches the 20, that is means it is equal to this is a condition will be not satisfied and it will move further. That means if we need to calculate the worst case of this particular set of code, that means it will be 1 plus 20 plus 1 plus 20. That means 1 plus 20 plus 1 plus 20. That means 20 plus 20, 40 and 42 of this particular line. But the values of this there will be in terms of n times, because we don't know the input size of that particular algorithm which is going to take an array or something else. That means let's just take an example here. Int k is equal to 0, that is going to run 1 times. Then here is a for loop that k is equal to, let's just say, let's just take this as n. No, let's just take it's 10 and initiate a new variable here. That means I is equal to, start from 0, I less than n, that means, and I plus here, and here we have k plus and something else also. Now we are going to calculate the complexity of this particular line. That means it is going to run 1 times this one for the I iteration. That means it will go till n, that means n iteration plus 1 false condition plus, and it is going to iterate n times because from 0 till n minus 1, that is the n. So, and then this is going to iterate how much times? N times. That means it is going to figure out that how many times it is going to iterate. That means from 0 to n minus 1. That means it is 0 to n minus 1. That is the n times it is going to iterate this particular line set of code. The inside of this block, it is going to iterate n times. The complexity will be big O of 1, 2, 3. That means 3n plus 3. This is for the worst case. Actually, the best will be also the same, because the best case is calculated when the algorithm takes less time in certain scenarios. That means, let's just take an example here. Let's just check if for loop and I is equal to 0, that means I less than n and I plus plus. Next, there is a condition inside of this. That means if I is less than, let's just say, greater than, let's just say 10, it is going to return. That means if this condition satisfies, it is not going to return or anything else happen inside of this particular line. That means if we are going to calculate the, let's just add a code here also so that we can find out the complexity more frequently. That means j int j plus plus, and we are going to initiate that particular int j is equal to 10. Here the for loop ends, and now we calculate the complexity. That means 1 plus, that is 1 plus n plus 1 plus n for the for loop. This is going to iterate n times because it is inside of the for loop, and this will only iterate when if condition satisfies. We need to calculate how we can get the best case. For the best case, it is going to iterate only 10 times, because if the value of n is let's just say 20, that is going to return 20 before 10. That means it is going to iterate this one n times. That means if condition is there, it is not going to iterate this particular set of code. Let's just say not return here. We are decrementing j. That means another code is added so that the complexity will be higher for this particular line of code that is also n, but it will not be iterating this particular line because it is inside of the if condition. If the if condition is satisfied, then this will go in. That means the worst case is this, including this. But if we need to calculate the best case, we just only include this particular line, not this one, for the best case. For best, not if. For worse, all. That is how we calculate this particular set of code. Let's just take another example so that it is more clear to us. Let's just take int k is equal to 10. For loop int I is equal to k I less than n and I plus plus. Let's just take another for loop, that is the nested for loop inside of it. Int j is equal to 0 and j less than, let's just say, n again, n again, and j plus plus, and here we have k plus plus. Now we need to calculate what is the complexity of this particular algo. Now we know that only one times it will execute, and this will execute 1 plus 1 plus n. 1 for the I 1 plus n for this particular condition, 1 for the false condition, and n else for the true condition that will execute. Then I plus plus, that means n. It will iterate n times, and this for loop is nested inside of this for loop. That means it is also going to iterate this particular for loop n times. That means we will have n outside of this particular loop and the complexity of this particular line inside of this bracket. That means 1 plus n plus n. That is what is the complexity of this particular line. Now for the n, most important part, you need to focus here. That means k plus plus. It is also inside of this particular loop and also inside of this particular loop. That is the for loop. This for loop is executing n times, and this for loop also executing n times. This is executing this for loop n times and n times. That means n into n, and this is going to iterate n into n. That means n square. How? N for this one, that is, we know that k plus plus is also inside of this particular loop. That means n for outer loop, and this loop is executing n times. That means n. That means it is n square. That is how we calculate this particular set of code complexity. Now we take another example, but what if we have if condition inside of it? Let's just take an example of that particular set of code. Let's just put a if condition here. If j greater than 10, then do this. And k plus plus. Now, how do we calculate this particular code? Now it is also inside of this particular loop. That means it is going to iterate n square, same as this one. This, if we need to calculate the worst case, for worst case, it is n square, because it is also inside of this if condition and this for loop and this for loop. That means it is going to iterate n square. But if we need to calculate for best case, we are going to neglect this. Why? Because for the best case, it is not going to iterate this particular set of code. The condition can be anything else, like we assigned a variable above that was k. Let's just assign another variable up there. That means int z is equal to 0 is equal to 0. That means z equal to 0, that is going to true. But if it is not equal to true, that is going to take the best case. If it is equal to true, that is going to take the n square, because it is always true. But if there is some other condition, that means greater than 0, and we are going to increment this here. it is going to iterate that particular line of set of code. Now we are going to take an example for the while loop here. While and initiate a variable here. Let's just say count is equal to 0 for now. And we have count less than 20. And we're going to increment this count plus plus. We already did that. That is equal to 0 from that. That means 20 plus 1 and this is 20. But what if we connect these two, for loop and while loops? Let's just take an example here. Let's just say for loop and I is equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. First for loop. Next for loop, that is going to take int j is equal to 0, and let's just assign here 10 and j plus plus. Then we have the count is equal to 0 for now, but count plus plus. It is going to iterate that much. Okay, now the condition ends here, but if true, that means it is going to iterate inside of that particular line. And int z is equal to count. It's just an example. And while z less than 10 and z minus minus. Now we need to calculate the complexity of the whole code provided here. It's an example. Let's just count the complexity. For this particular line, it is 1, as we discussed earlier. For this particular line, it is 1 plus 1 plus n plus n. 1 plus n for the conditions, 1 for the initialization, and 1 for the iteration. Next up, we have this one from n from the above loop. This is going to go for 1 plus for the initialization. It is going to go not n. For this time, it is going to go n. That means 1 plus 10. That means 10. For n, we have 10 and 10. Because the value was fixed here as it was 10, and it is going to iterate 10 times, incremented 10 times, and check 11 times actually. And inside of this, that is going to take n into 10. 10 for this particular loop and n for that particular loop, and then it is inside of both the loops. That means it is going to iterate, and the value of count will be 10 into n. And this value will be used here. That means for this particular line, whatever it is, inside of this, it will iterate one time because it is true, and it is the compiler will go directly inside. Next, we have z is equal to new variable. That means initialization 1, and it is going to check this particular. The count was 10n. That means is equal to z. That means it is going to check this condition 10n plus 1 times. 10n for the right. That means it was this one, and in decrementing till it is less than 0. Sorry, we need to change here because the example was iterate this loop until this condition is satisfied. That means it is greater than 10. That means the value is, if the value is here 20, that is going to iterate 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, and 11. Till 11, it is going to decrement to 10, but that is not going to take that and move it to next part. Here, the 10n plus 1, and it will execute 10n times. The value will be till 10 times. That means it is going to iterate that much for this particular scenario. Let's just say here it is 10. For 10, it will just declare minus 10. That is going to take only from 10n to 10. Just go from 10n, it is going to decrement the value, decrement until it reaches 10. So 10n minus 10, that means it is going to iterate this much time for 10 if there is 10. But if it is 0 here, that means it is going to iterate 10n times. And inside of that, 10n for 0 and 10n minus 10, that means for 10. That is how we calculate the complexity. Now we can represent this in big O, big theta, and make this for the worst, average, and best. And here comes the question, how to calculate the worst, best case. Best, neglect all the block inside of if or condition, or any condition. If we get any conditional, neglect the inside of the block. The block inside of if will be neglected for best case. That means whole this will be neglected. This part will be neglected for the best case. But for worst case, all execution will be take place and added up. The sum will add up. That means 10n minus 10, 10n plus, these all will add up to get that particular value. For average, we have, for average, that is best plus worst divided by 2. That is how we calculate the average. We can only calculate the average if that the bound is in the, if both are in the same bound. That means both are in n or n square or log n. That is how we calculate that particular scenarios. If the worst case also include the n square and the n, we can calculate that particular scenario. But if one of them is in log n, the theta will not be able to calculate because the bounds are different. That is how we calculate that particular scenario. The concept is to use that particular each and every iteration and count that particular variable, changing indexes, and note these also. The AP can also be used in these particular scenarios. If we get like iterativeness, that means the first value is 5. The iteration is, this is going to iterate 5 times first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is going to iterate that particular also. But that means if this for loop is executing 5 times and this is going to iterate that 5 times into, that means 1, 2, 3, 4, that the value is decreasing after each iteration. That means these 5 is executed by 5 and this for loop is executing this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But after each iteration, the numbers are decreasing. That means we can apply a AP here. How? That means we can apply AP by using the sum formula, that is n by 2, 2a plus n minus 1 into d. How? Let's just suppose we get this. Let's just suppose it is happening. That means first for 1, 2, these is executed by first for loop, and this much is executed by second for loop. That means we need to calculate how much of them are there inside of this. That means we need to calculate the total. That means we need to calculate the sum. How we calculate the sum? The n divided by 2. That means 2a. A is n minus 1. That is this particular 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is the n minus 1. That means n minus 1 into d. That is the difference. That is the 1. In decrementing by 1 by 1. Decrementing by 1 by 1. Decrementing 1 by 1. Here we will put 2n plus n minus 1 and n by 2. That means 3 minus 1 into n by 2. That is how we can calculate that whole particular scenario according to this condition given to us. The logic will be given this. The AP, how it is used in this particular scenarios. The concept to remember is that we need to count how many times that particular line is executed to find the complexity of particular line. That means if this particular line is executed one times, that type 1, and then for loop is executed, I told you about that I is equal to 0. That means I less than n and I plus plus according to that particular scenarios. And if it is inside of that particular, and we need to apply this n also, so that it iterates and we can count that particular sum. Next up, we can use also the count variable which we assign here and iterating that particular scenarios here, as we can do in our upcoming tasks. That is all about it. You can calculate the complexity now of any related loops and another codes provided to us, and we need to just add these particular scenarios for that particular to calculate the total complexity. We are not going to calculate the space complexity here. This is for the time complexity of particular algorithm. Time complexity, we need to tell the worst, that is which is preferable. That means how bad it works. That means how much time it will take to execute in the worst scenario, and this will tell best. That means how much time it will take to cover the best scenario, which we get the resulted values for that particular algorithm to continue. The log n will iteration is when we divide and conquer. That means if we got an array of n, we are dividing that particular in and using maybe recursion or something else for loops. That is how the log n comes into play. This was all about it, to give a basic idea of how we can calculate that particular complexity. We can use this in upcoming task. This is the basics of to get to know about how we calculate for particular line by line to calculate the worst and best. If we find the worst and the best, we can calculate the average too with that particular. Just remember, for the best case, you no need to include the inside of the if condition. Do not take this one into account and just add this and this, because it is inside of the if condition. That means in best case it is not going to include this, because complexity will high. That is not it is inside of the best case. That was all from my side for now, but we can do this further also. Let me know if you have any doubts. Thank you very much for watching this.